Emotional empathy is like a superpower, and I think it's that of grace. Ego has the ability to engage emotional empathy as well, but it's a real struggle for ego to try and do that or allow that to happen, allow that to come through. Whereas grace, it comes naturally to her, and she's able to use it as an incredible way to feel how someone else feels. They can almost sense their thoughts and their reactions to the stories that are being told. And we can do all of that just in our minds, using intense amounts of tuning into their frequency and attuning to their story. If a friend is telling you about their day and what happened, and it was full of drama and emotion and plot twists, and that means this implications. They're telling you all of this, and all along the way we are expected, often encouraged, but silently so. We're kind of it's an unspoken agreement that everyone needs to, when they listen to someone telling a story, they need to shut up and empathize and follow along. Like we did as we were children, we would more easily be enraptured, enthralled with whatever story was being told. And our level of empathy and creative imagination allows us to not only visualize the things that are being told, but we can jump into the different characters that are being portrayed and feel how they feel and imagine like we are them. And we can role play. And so it brings about this superpower, like I said, this ability to be able to imagine someone else's experience and then experience it through just acting and imagination and pretend. I mean, when kids pretend, that is like an absolute superpower, because even though on the surface level it seems like, oh, well, what's the big deal? The biggest kick you get out of it is that you empathize and you're able to create some kind of connection, and you enjoy the ups and then you don't enjoy the downs. And it's a way of just virtually experiencing another person's experience, right? That's a great benefit. But it ends there, right? In terms of our uses. It tends to be prevalent when we're kids, when our imaginations are running wild and our ego hasn't fully risen up and developed yet. I think when we're younger, we're more of grace. And we're more of these abilities. But as we age, ego starts to really take over. It starts to transform within us, and sometimes it happens very early, sometimes it happens very late, sometimes not much at all. I think it's not like a shared thing, ego and grace. It's not like either or, it's both. It's fluctuating majorities of both. And I think that different people with these different archetypes fundamentally have their own mix of how much they are of ego and how much they are of grace, and how many commonalities that they share, because you can be both. We are both. But yeah, coming back to emotional empathy, it is that of grace. It feels like that, absolutely. And if you believe that grace, like I'm saying, is this form of higher self. I characterize her as grace, and I give it a gender because that helps me create a story of an understanding that, until proven like absolute nonsense, like impossible, unless you're taken out of the story, then you'll carry on with the narratives that you're weaving and see where they take you, because it feels like you're attuning to them. And if you're talking about concepts about attuning and then you apply it to yourself after just seemingly making it up, it seems to work freakishly. And so you carry on, and you right, to get to the point of this voice note. It's about when people need to apologize, or when people need to listen to someone else's story. Something just happened and it's very important to them. You need to listen and start engaging your level of empathy, your level of creative ability to see how they see and feel how they feel. They need that from you at this moment, or you've done something wrong and your partner is very upset with you, and it's a big deal, like you really screwed up. It's not irreversible, but you need to immediately react and tend to this wound, because it is like a timer. Because the more time that you take and you haven't addressed that you've caused a wound, and that the wound is actually like gushing with blood, right? You've just caused a hemorrhage, and the longer you take to even acknowledge that you've just caused a wound and a hemorrhage, and all this time you're not addressing it, you're not tending to it and trying to fix it, it deepens and intensifies that level of disrespect that the person feels if they feel like they were wounded and insulted and disrespected. So it all magnifies the longer you take, right? The other person in the conversation, the wrongdoer, the sorry person. So they will acknowledge that, oh, you seem upset, I must have done something. And so from ego's perspective, since ego's not really easily able to tune in to that level of empathy immediately, we might have to kind of fire up the computer in order to do so, right? And we don't even know often at times the intensity of the trigger that we just caused, right? Of the insult or slight or whatever. From ego's point of view, it's usually that we are unaware, right? And then when we are made aware, we can see your face, you're upset, you shouted at me, something just like, oh, an energetic shift just happened, bang, right? So once you do become aware, we're still in the position of ignorance. We're oblivious, usually. So if someone's more attuned to ego than they are grace, and so they're not able to use empathy straight away, it is a struggle, and so they are unaware a lot of the time. And knowing this concept, to go, okay, here's what you do in this situation. You have to start up that engine, that machine called empathy, and you need to get attuned to that. You need to plug it in, you know, let it become a superpower. Let it become an ability, right? It's a tool that you need to use now. Start empathy. You know, really, really concentrate your imagination on that other person and remember what they told you before, where the story left off from last time. You've got to really think about, like, okay, they did that then and they were with that person and they seemed like it was a big deal at that point, so that's the part of the story that I really need to remember. And we do this kind of mental chatter in a much faster pace, obviously inside our minds, right? But this kind of process happens in a kind of more unconscious mind, that of the ego. So for me, a lot of the time, since I have such a poor memory, I blame it on the poor memory as well. Because it's true, I really have a poor memory and I just forget stuff. So it might come across sometimes that I'm unempathetic or forgetful, but it's more about I'm just forgetful. But once you start that tool and you are able to tune in and you are able to sense, yeah, I remember now, you told me that thing happened and yeah, that made you feel like that and that threw you off for that day, and then that happened and it made it worse, and yeah, that must really suck. And so you start to go through this mental imagination, this mental chatter, and you're able to visualize and emotionally empathize, right? It might be to small degrees, or it might be to like on point exactly how it was level of empathetic connection. But I feel like those that of ego, they really struggle with that. It is a slow process. It's like dial up next to fiber broadband. It's that kind of difference. And like I said, often at times they're not able to jump on using empathy straight away either. They have to be reminded. Now is the time to use empathy and listen to me and tune in, because I need you to fucking care about me right now. And I think this kind of process happens all over the place, and not just in the couple of examples that I gave about being sorry or just needing to listen to a story. And they're usually connected. Let's be honest. Those more of the egos and unaware of these processes going on underneath, if they're constantly having to be surprised when their, let's say in this example, partner is angry at them and upset at them, and each time they're just completely oblivious, and so they have to just find a way to apologize, make it seem genuine, make it seem like they've gone through that process and they've empathized with them and they understand what they went through, and now they're in a better position to actually authentically apologize. Maybe not even for themselves, but just say, I'm so sorry you went through that. That sucks. I'm only just realizing it now. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you before. It is that kind of, suddenly you are able to attune yourselves to them and connect with them on an intuitive and empathetically connected level. Because that is important for our connection to each other, right? We're responsible for getting to know each other on a much deeper level. And empathy is a term that maybe hasn't been given its full understanding, because it's a superpower. And to our I don't know, I guess, best attempts at using empathy. Like the most we can get out of it, as far as I can see, is well, how would I see? I'm not attuned to it as much as other people can be, are able to. Yeah, so from my current understanding and experience, I think the max levels of empathy can be almost like being psychic, where you can tune in to what they've been up to, and as long as you've been given enough information to go by, you can just pick up their trail of where they were in life, follow it back into the present moment, and then because you've gone through that journey, you've lived in their shoes, you felt how they felt, you thought how they thought, you almost like imagined that you were going to do the things that they did before they even appeared in your mind, in the empathetic journey of telepathy. So what if actual telepathy, was a product of an intense ability to empathize? Who knows? Possibly, because you can't discount the cap on this ability, because if in itself we can admit that, yeah, empathy is an ability that most humans are able to just use at will, the ability to imagine how someone else has experienced through their descriptions and then feel how they did, as if you were there, as if you were able to just jump in their game, like everyone's playing a game, and they're like, oh, use empathy to sync with my profile, my account, and you can feel and get snippets of my experience, my game. We can share in each other's experiences. How crazy is that? But it's understood. It's undersaid. We do that all the time, but we take that for granted. But if you really think about it, that is a freaking superpower. That's you can see the potential there. Because if you admit that happens, and yeah, we're able to do that, then where is the end? Where can it take us? How can we develop this freaking superpower? So that led me to think that, okay, well, let's hop, skip, and a jump. If we can use this power, this ability called empathy, to understand how someone feels and therefore maybe predict their movements, what they're going to do next. Imagine if it's just able to predict to a high degree of accuracy that someone is able to predict a few days into the future, right? Or the next day into the future, the next few hours, right? But what if you were able to extend that period of time, right? What if you were able to see properly into their future? Not just, an insignificant, I can see with 100% accuracy, 4 hours into your future. Some people are able to do different forms of that. But it's through an intense practice of like real intense empathy, right? And that is just a tool. The process is the same. It's attunement. If you were to follow along with this word of frequency, it's the only word I have, that everything has its own frequency and everything has its own, it's like wavelength, right? Its own DNA code, its own URL, its own web server. It's kind of like that, where once you know its name and you have its memory and it loads up, then you're able to connect virtually and use this ability called empathy and imagination and attuning. You're able to like start diving into their experience just in your mind, in your, I don't know, like higher form of knowing. You're able to tune in and get pieces of information that seemed like, well, impossible, because how else could you know that without either actually having some kind of level of being psychic, mind reading, or you're lying and you found out somehow, and then you're pretending like you didn't know, and you're pretending like you just made it up or just understood. Yeah. So empathy is really kind of like a superpower that we could develop. And I think that if you were to look at it at face value, like, oh, extreme empathy, that I'm going to try and level up as a superpower, that might seem ridiculous. Like someone's telling you a story and you go like, okay, I'm super tuned in now. I'm tuning in as hard as I can. Yeah, hit me. How did that make you feel? I'm not talking about intense attuning and intense concentration like that. It's not that kind of intensity, but it's more like fine-tuning an ability to do it powerfully, but without it being overt. To maximize its efficiency and its effectiveness. So yeah, what if? I think it's worth exploring, especially since I'm more of ego, I feel. I'm becoming more and more of grace. I'm attuning more to grace these days. Of course, since I'm coming up with these concepts here, these forms of inspiration. But yeah, these are the things I really struggle with. And if I'm able to use my superpower of just truth-seeking and seeking to understand all things, because I'm using my ability to try and understand all things, it will be super useful to be able to pick up another superpower that attuned to grace, where I'm able to use higher levels of empathy to not only make up for what's lacked, maybe in past conversations where I've misunderstood why they were so upset, or they just wound up not talking to me as much anymore, and maybe I realized, like, yeah, they seem to be distant. It's I guess that possibly might be from a level of being oblivious to these duties that they reside on another frequency. And yeah, some people, like ego, for example, the most ego-like, we are on the lower frequencies. That's where we operate. And so, yeah, often we're unaware of even the higher frequencies' existence. So it's difficult for us to tune in to a higher frequency because we're not really, we're not used to that. So these concepts, I think they're very useful to know.